just data when the electronics have a mind of its own. I think we'll start. We have a lot to get through. So good morning and welcome to this, our final webinar for 2022. I know that there's a lot of you returning and you return many times. So thank you for your attendance. And yeah, let's get stuck into it. My name is Gerard Joyce, and today's webinar is titled, So You Want to Be Resilient. I'm going to start with a quick introduction to us. It'll be very quick, as I think a lot of you knows at this stage. And I want to talk about the difference really between business continuity and resilience, because you will be forgiven for thinking, is resilience just a new name for business continuity? No, it's more, but I'll try and cover that. The essence of today's is about the five, what I would consider the pillars of resilience, and 5 disciplines you need to be doing, one of which is business continuity. And then how do you build and then sustain the resilience? It is a capability that you have to acquire or develop. And I think a key element these days on resilience is to include your third parties. Most of us do not survive, cannot survive without some third parties. Think of it as an extended organization. And then quick look, and it's only a quick look at reporting. How would you know if you're becoming more resilient, and how would you report that and demonstrate that to somebody else? And finally, I'll end up with a short list, because it is Christmas, of 5 things you can do now. So stay with us. This I haven't used in a long time. A friend, Kevin Knight, who was a former chair of the ISO Technical Committee in Risk Management, and I love this one. Survival is not compulsory. You decide. Do you want to survive? Do you want to survive a pandemic? Do you want to survive a cyber attack? Do you want to survive whatever the service disruption? Your choice. Okay. Bit about us, where we see ourselves as experienced risk and compliance professionals, like many of you today. And we're members of different organizations like the Institute of Risk Management, Compliance Ireland, Institute of Bankers, etc., and try to keep our skills sharp with these membership. 2 of us involved in standards development. I chair the National Committee on Risk Management in Ireland and represent Ireland on the ISO Technical Committee. And yes, we sell a software, a GRC software, also called calQrisk. Indeed, we started trading as calQrisk when we became known as calQrisk. And we have over 200 organizations using the software. These are generally in the financial services sector. So you have credit unions, insurance brokers, fund management, investment managers, internet payments, and then the not-for-profit sector, charities, sports organizations, and housing associations generally. That's kind of us, a broad reach of customers. I'm not going to go into this, just to give you an idea for those who don't know. The platform has evolved over 10 years, covers more than just risks where we started, and tasks and incidents and third parties. You can see their meetings in there. So quite an extensive platform. If you're interested, do please contact us. Okay. So what is business continuity? Well, taking the definition from the ISO standard 22300, it's the capability of the organization to continue delivery of services or products at acceptable predefined levels following disruptive incidents. And you see here the focus here is on, first of all, an assumption that you've got a disruption and how you cope with that disruption. That key systems are recovered within agreed timeframes, and essential services are maintained, and you assist staff in the event of the incident. So the focus is very much on an assumption, I think, that you've had a disruption. Whereas resilience, I think the focus is on the outcomes. That is, how your customers experience it. Are they affected? Preferably not. And the Basel Committee described resilience as the ability to deliver critical operations through disruption. Not kind of stop and then start again and go into continuity mode, but to continue to deliver the critical functions and operations through a disruption. Now you can see how this certainly does include the business continuity element, but certainly reading, and it's not just me who will be saying this, but this is what I take out of the various regulators' guidelines and guidance on resilience. It's an outcome of multiple functions. Yes, risk management, information security, and for me that includes cybersecurity, incident management, including that initial crisis management element, the business continuity, certainly, and restoring the critical systems within a time frame. And then we're not just IT disaster recovery, but total disaster recovery. Let's have a look. I would say that what you want is as few incidents as possible and as short as possible. That would be the measure that I would say. I thought I would include this DORA. You will be hearing more about DORA over the next few years. I know it's not a fish. It's a Digital Operation Resilience Act from Europe, and I could say that the pandemic prompted them, but I think that we're even thinking about this before the pandemic. But it's to reduce vulnerabilities and strengthen the resilience of critical entities. This is where the European Union is coming from. But whereas it will apply proportionally to the large organizations that we depend on, the principles are the same, and eventually they trickle down to all organizations. And you can see from, and I've taken the wording here from DORA, it's about preparing for, coping with, protecting against, responding to, and recovering from. So you can see in that definition, that goes beyond the business continuity. Whatever the disruption is, whether it's a natural disaster, a terrorist threat, health emergency, a hybrid of these, we'll see in a moment. I like to do pictures, and if I put this graphic up, it might have, you can see where the 5 pillars have the role to play. I think it would start with risk management, where you identify the threats, identify the vulnerabilities, and start putting in protection and measures to prevent the incident happening in the first place. So you want to have less incidents and be more, have higher uptime, if you wish. In information security, because it has become so complex, I don't think you can relegate that to a subset of risk management. It certainly is a lot of risks to manage and is part of risk management, but needs attention and needs expertise. I'm using the language here from the NIST, the American Information Security Standard: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And there are various activities and capabilities you need to acquire and develop as you mature in your information security management. And then there's the traditional incident management, that panic when an incident happens, maybe it's the crisis, and getting it under control, while team 2 start the business continuity actions and get the critical systems back up and running if they've been impacted. And then when the crisis is waning, then that team maybe converts to the disaster recovery one. Now, some incidents are over in 15 minutes, and some might take 15 months, depending on the nature of the attack. Again, the goal here is to have as few as possible and to have that time from the incident to where you're back up and running as short as possible. Now, you'll see around the 5 pillars, I've written governance, and I originally thought it's that a 6th pillar, and I thought, no, I changed, and I said, no, it's a plinth. You have to have governance in all of these things that you do, around resilience and around the individual disciplines. You have to have, by governance, I mean that it's on the agenda of the senior management team, that there is somebody responsible, certainly at a high level, for ensuring resilience, that there may be individuals responsible for the various disciplines. And it doesn't have to be 5 people, it might be 2, But governance means that there's policy, that there's attention at the top table for this, and it won't happen unless you have that governance. I thought I'd include this graphic of a workshop we did to say, well, what can cause a disruption? And hopefully you can see I know part of my screen is hidden, but it could come from a system failure. It can come from building loss, people loss, it could be financial, it Could be disruption at your third party. And yes, I put a star opposite the, the power loss, a malicious attack, which might be a cyber attack in your systems. It could be a flood. It could be the sickness, could be an endemic or pandemic, as we've had. Include them all. If you do this workshop and you realize it's more than just a cyber attack, and be prepared for them all. They're all service disruptions. And so to my slide on maturity model, I have a few on maturity model, because if you want to be resilient, it's not something you can be overnight. It's not something you acquire in weeks. For me, it's more like years, 1 to 2 years. Hopefully you can achieve it in. And it's a maturity model type approach, because you can't get to the level 5 without having gone through level 4. Now, I think most of us are probably around 3 to 4. And for those of you who haven't come across maturity models before, this was something, I think, back in the 70s and 80s, developed by Carnegie Mellon University. The idea was it's a tool that helps people and organizations assess where they are today in terms of capability, and then acquire the skills and the capabilities, I guess, to move to the next level. I've taken the language foundation, building and sustaining from regulator guidelines. I like that language, so I've applied that to levels 3, 4, and 5. You don't want to be in 1 or 2. I think most of you will have certainly 3. And then if you try that across, add another dimension of people, process, and technology, and of course now we have to add third parties, and assess yourself. Where are you today? Because if you're going to become resilient, you need to know, well, what's your starting point? And you might be better in some things than others. So if we look at the level of foundation, building, and sustaining, those 3 levels, and then within people, process, and technology, look at the governance within those, the risk management within people, the information security around people, and so on. So it's multidimensional, but if you take this approach, you will end up with a long to-do list. But that's why I said it's going to take 1 to 2 years to reach that higher level. I'm going to give you a sample of each of these. Now, there's a lot of information on the slides. I'm not going to cover it all, but you will have a copy of the slides later. And it's not exhaustive. It's really to prompt. So we start with governance. And the idea I have here is that in terms of process, yes, you might have a resilience framework developed, correct. But is it aligned with risk management? That would be better, to my mind, that there's consistency there and you're getting the benefits of the risk management framework as well. It certainly should be aligned. I'm not saying what is a good framework, but it certainly should be aligned. And then one of the capabilities, let's say, are characteristics of somebody who's at the sustaining level is that it's not just aligned, it's approved, it's reviewed, and it's tested. So you're not just resting on your laurels when you've got to a certain level. There's a continuous improvement mentality there, and you're continuously testing and trying to improve. If I take the risk management pillar, I'd say a lot of organizations have good risk management in key areas, but why not have it across the organization? Because you don't know where the next incident is going to come from that could bring the organization to its knees. And I would say the really good organizations have risk management embedded in the strategic planning. So when you make those big decisions to move into a different area or to do something you haven't done before, you have considered the risks, and you're not going to start on something that is going to, again, bring the organization to its knees. Now, if I take information security, and I picked out a number of examples here, but again, in the interest of time, I'll move fast. You might say in terms of people, yeah, we do awareness training. Or when people join, we give them awareness training, but is it refreshed? Now, I know I've written it here on an annual basis. I would now recommend doing it on a quarterly basis. And that's good. But the really good companies, what do? Well, they check if it's getting through. They check if people have actually fully understood what they've trained them on. And they do, they send emails with links in it to, that are basically simulating a dodgy email and seeing how many people click on the link. And then they can say to that 10%, you've got the training, you've been made aware of it, why did you click on the link? So focus the remedial action on the 10% who work in listening mode. Process. Yeah, good companies, I would say, are identifying the technical vulnerabilities in systems, the flaws in Microsoft's operating system, for example, and addressing them. But is it then validated and assured? You think you fixed it, you actually check the fix. And then the really good companies, because you can be overwhelmed with a lot of noise and vulnerabilities, threat intelligence-led penetration testing. So focus on the ones that are maybe happening in your sector. If you hear what's happening to a competitor, you might be next. Threat intelligence is kind of to guide your actions. So yeah, it's a little bit more sophisticated, if you like. Good companies have, implement and apply baseline security standards. Better ones, I would say, check at intervals that you continue to be compliant. And the really good companies, I would say, they take it to another level, and they're monitoring all assets on a continuous basis, not just occasional or ad hoc, but on a continuous basis to ensure compliance with agreed standards. And finally, if I'm harping on about information security, because I think everything we do is underpinned by information security, so we need to get that right. Third parties. Do your agreements with your third parties include a section requiring that they have information security as good as yours? Have you assessed them to ensure that they are actually delivering what it says in the contract? And if you, and this happens, your relationship with third parties will change over the years. Is there a corresponding change and updating in the contract? That continuous change. Just when you think when you've built it, you've had the foundation, you've built it, the sustaining does require an active effort to make sure you stay at that top level. Incident. I'll just pick one here. An incident plan in place, great, but that I would say is a minimum. Have you tested the plan? Have you tested the plan in different scenarios? And I'll talk about testing in a moment. But if you have a plan, have you tested it for a cyber attack? Have you tested it for loss of the building? Have you tested the plan for, well, we've all tested now for pandemic, haven't we? We know how to cope with that. But the next disaster is going to be one you haven't kind of thought of. And the really good companies, when they do a test or they have an incident, they learn from that and they modify their plans. They update their plans with those learnings. That's what the good companies, the really good companies do. And you want to be one of them. Here's another one. In the technology, you might monitor access from remote systems, remote access to your systems, to your maybe your critical systems. Well, better will be to monitor all remote access because you don't know how easy it might be to jump from one system to another. And the really good companies are monitoring all attempts because an attempted access might be an early indicator of an attack. So there are degrees of how well you can do this and how much time and effort you can invest, but it is a maturity model, remember. Business continuity. Is senior management involved in the design of the plan so that it's embedded in the organization? That's a good foundation, I would say. Are roles and responsibilities for implementation of the program clearly assigned? Because it's not one person, it has to be distributed throughout the organization. Because part of that is everybody knowing the role in the event of a serious incident. And then do you have alternatives? If a disaster won't happen when everybody's at work and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It could be 2 o'clock at night and the IT manager could be on holidays. So you have to consider those scenarios as well. I would imagine that most of you have an IT recovery strategy for your critical systems. That would be foundation. But have you then got a priorities that are aligned with business objectives, so that if you have 10 critical systems, the sequence, which one is up first, and they all will be brought up within the total time that you're allowing to get back. And again, the companies who are at the top quartile or top 10%, I would say, are reviewing these annually and updating. And finally, the recovery element. And recovery, I think, is usually about when you have a serious incident that has done serious damage. You will have documented plans, but have you tested the plans again? Because untested plans will fail, honestly. And the first test you do will be a failure. Failure in the sense that it won't deliver it, but it will be a success in that you will learn something from it. And I think, again, good companies are learning always from the tests and from the incidents and improving their plans. So I know that was a lot to take in, but I hope that the combined, message of these last 6 slides is that there's good, there's better, and there's best. And you need to strive for the best. You won't get it all in 6 months or a year, but continue to strive. I mentioned testing the plans more than once. And whereas you can test individual units like a backup restore, test a plan against a scenario, like a cyber attack, and start by building a credible scenario. Usually that's where the work is, that somebody has to put together a scenario and then present it to the team or teams that are going to be involved in an incident. So it might be the senior management team, it might be the IT recovery team, it might be the facilities and communications team. Different plans have different way of dividing up the teams. But build a credible scenario. Generally, the way this works is like a 2-hour session, and it might start with, if it was a cyber attack scenario, it's 2 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday morning, and somebody's working late, clicks on a link, and it appears they've launched a virus into the system. What do you do? And build it. What happens at that 2 o'clock? Does anybody know? And is there anybody there to press the button and disconnect the network from the users? And you can build these scenarios, test them, takes about 2 hours, and learn from it. Now, I put examples in here of power failure. Again, do the same thing. 7 o'clock in the morning, ESP power goes with blackout, and the generator fails. You've got an hour maybe backup on your UPS in your computer room. Does anybody know? And you can build these scenarios and check without actually pulling the plug and see, are you ready? These plans generally do 2 things. They will find gaps in plans, but they'll familiarize people with their role, what they need to do. You'll consider the contingencies and the options so that when you do have an incident, you can react much faster. I think I used a quote in a webinar a few weeks ago about from Dwight Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower said, plans are useless, but planning is essential. And it's that planning and that testing of the plans where you've considered the options, the contingencies, you're better prepared. You don't know what the next incident is going to be, exactly, but you've considered a lot of contingencies, so you will be better prepared. Okay. On to talk about third parties. Because third parties are basically an extension of your organization. You might have service providers like IT or facilities or payroll. You might have agents working for you if you're an insurance company. You might have critical suppliers without whom you cannot operate. And you might have contractors. If you're a housing association, you might have contractors, providing some of the services. You might call them service providers, you might call them contractors. So I think third parties come in lots of different forms. Here's a graphic for you. There was a time when our company was, your company was within the 4 walls you sit. Those days are long gone. One, because we're sitting at home or we're sitting in a sub-office, but we've outsourced. we've involved many third parties, whether it's IT services or debt collection or some of the back office functions that are better handled by an expert in that back office function. And if you've got a lot of them outsourced to the one back office, then maybe a concentration risk. If you really are dependent on fuel for your heating system, and in these cold days, have you enough fuel, and have you a contact with the fuel supplier to ensure that if you do run out, you have fuel again within half an hour. And if you outsourced things like payroll, where you've got sensitive information about your employees, there's a lot of risks that you've just pushed outside the four walls of the organization. And if you go outside of the EU, people talk about offshoring risk or country risk, and if you offshore something to a country that has earthquakes and let's say it's a different culture, maybe different employment laws, and could you be accused of supporting child labor? You bring on a whole host of other risks to the organization that could cause you a disruption, and it could be that the regulator says cease and desist. It doesn't have to be a weather event. So yeah, scary, but our organizations are extended. Look at these from a service disruption and where the disruptions can come from in your third parties. Now, I've got a 8-point checklist here of things to do. Even just maintaining a list of your third parties that you deal with, it will surprise you how long that list is. I reckon it will be twice as long as you thought it was going to be, whatever that number is. And when you have that list complete, and by the way, you might start by asking accounts payable for a list of organizations you have paid money to in the last 2 years. And that'll be a long list, but pick those that are critical, identify those, right? Because certainly if you're a regulated entity, the regulator expects you to do this, but I would say you should be doing it anyway, not waiting for the regulator to ask you. Then identify the risks associated with each of those third parties. What controls are in place? Remember, you're trying to prevent incidents, so this risk management part of it is a key element. Are the controls in place to prevent incidents? And if you're monitoring service levels from third party, it's often an indicator of an impending problem. Incidents don't have to be always sudden. They can be forewarning of something about to happen. I would say, and this is where a lot of organizations, I think, fail, they don't document incidents. And if you're not documenting the incidents, then when a big one comes, it comes as a complete surprise, except to those who saw the small ones and said, I could have told you that was going to happen. Why? Because we've had an incident every Tuesday for the last 5 weeks, and it was only a matter of time. Then you wish you had recorded those pre-warning incidents. I think you have to involve your third parties also in your business continuity testing, because if you have a disaster, they're probably part of the solution. So make sure you do involve them and keep that communication line open. So thoughts on reporting. What could I say in reporting on this, on resilience, just on resilience? And I said earlier that you want to reduce the number of incidents. So this looks like, yeah, it's gradually reducing, but you also want to reduce the downtime that's associated with each incident. So maybe the downtime, cumulative downtime each month is going down, and it looks good. But I thought I'd put in a third picture there, and that's the average duration of each incident, because I think that's the real measure. If the incidents, certainly I want to know the incidents are going down, but I want to know that we're recovering faster. Why? And there's a lot of reasons why this would be improved. It might be that you have better change management, so that when you change something and something breaks, you can go back a step easily and go back to where it was working. Whereas if you have poor change management and people are making loads of changes without documenting them, you might have to go back 3 steps before it's working again, because you don't know which of the last 3 broke it. So, A few reports, and it doesn't take many, will tell you if you're going in the right direction. And finally, because I want to leave some time for questions, I thought I'd pick on a few things you can do now. And if you're interested in more, by the way, on this, we have a white paper on our website. It's 28 pages, which is, I suppose, this webinar in greater detail. But I picked 5 that I think would get you on a good starting position. It has to be on the agenda of the senior management team. If it's not, if the senior management team aren't interested, aren't setting this as a goal for the organization, then everything else will fail, to be honest. I think the next step is identify your business critical services. Because you can't do everything, but start with the really critical ones and identify the third parties you depend upon for the delivery of those services. Obviously, identify the systems. Develop a response plan. Any plan is better than no plan, but do develop a response plan and test it, because make it appropriate, make it work for you. And then I think, as a separate discipline, but obviously interrelated here, is the managing the third parties. That you just don't assume that everything is perfect with your third parties, that they know the importance to you. Now, what is it? Don't expect what you don't inspect. There's another quote. Okay. I think that's about 32 minutes, and I wanted to finish, and I know it's a lot of information in 32 minutes, but I wanted to give you a chance to ask questions, and I can see there's some already. So let's have a look. What does CQR and CMI stand for? Okay, Patricia, the CQR is calQrisk, so that was our kind of framework, and the CMMI is Carnegie Mellon Institute, Carnegie Mellon Management Institute, I think it was. So it was the original people who came up with, well, I'm attributing it to Carnegie Mellon, the concept of maturity model. My graphic in there was purely out of my head. I wanted to show, so don't read anything into the actual months. Some months will be lower, but there'll be different reasons for that. I showed some peaks and some troughs because that may look like it's going down, but it might be going down because it's a month of lower activity or higher activity. So there could be other things happening. But I think when you look behind these incidents and you look at how quickly did we recover from them. I mean, I can remember personal experience in a company. We had a computer room with 28 million euros worth of equipment in it. And I know this because we lost power to it. And the first time we lost power, it took us, I think, 55 minutes to get everything back up and running. Not bad, you might say. But the second time it happened, we got it back in 35 minutes. Why? Because we learned a lot from the first time. I remember things like tagging the plugs, writing on the plug what this was a plug for, so that you plugged the systems in the correct sequence, and you didn't have this massive, 100 plugs, and you didn't know which one was which. But yes, you will learn from incidents. Any other questions? I'm sure there must be more questions. Are you not giving me a hard time because it's Christmas? I will hang on for a few more minutes just to see. I'd be interested to know if DORA is, how many of you actually have come across DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act. I know certainly the larger companies among you will certainly have heard about it. And it's kind of I'm not sure how far into the 2-year plan we are, but it's coming down the tracks. And I refer to it purely because often that thinking at the higher level at the larger organizations eventually does trickle down and become standard practice in years. It won't be this year, but there's a lot of good ideas and good direction in that. We have another question. Okay. Anonymous. What kind of items would you have for discussion at the management meeting to kick the agenda item off for the first management meeting? Do you know what I would do? I would take the I would look at that graphic I did on service disruption and say, what could cause a service disruption? And I've consciously called it service disruption because it could be a cyber attack, it could be a loss of a building, it could be loss of people through, mass resignation, pandemic, sickness, whatever. And I think if you put that graphic in front and say, we survived the pandemic, but we're not resilient. And resilience can be a competitive advantage. I'd put it to you this way: there are statistics out there, and I don't have them to hand, but often when you have a service disruption and your customers think, "Oh, I thought they were, a safe bet." You may not lose the customer that week or that month, but it might be a slow death over 2 years as your customers leave you, don't renew the contract because the experience they had was you mightn't be as secure and as safe and as resilient as they thought. So, and there are statistics for business continuity, people who've experienced this serious interruption, quite a high percentage have gone out of business in 2 years or within 2 years, not immediately, but because there wasn't a fire that burned down the building, but it was just something that caused the customer to say, I'll give half my business to somebody else, just in case. So I think, but I would, from an agenda, I think I would start and say, with what can cause a service disruption, and identify maybe, if you look back through the slides, the areas that maybe you need to address. Now, you won't address them all at the first meeting, but maybe an agreement that that the organisation wants to become more resilient and be able to withstand these service disruptions. But I don't know if there's quite a few more comments. So, and we have a few minutes. Yes, thank you, Rola. Denise. What do you think about some companies out there offering resilience reviews as a service? I think there's a place for these. I think not everybody maybe have the skills, and if if you don't have the manpower and you can bring in a consultant who can dispassionately look at what you have and give you a to-do list, then that can certainly be useful. I would say look at the scope of what that review is going to cover, and be happy that the scope is aligned with what's important for you. Will calQrisk be advising credit unions on developing resilience program, and will you have a module in the software? Well, Tom, we have codified all of the guidance from the central bank, and we've put that down as level 1, I would say, the foundation. I think over the next year or two, the regulators probably will develop more what is in the building and sustaining, but we have a lot of that stuff, I suppose, in there in terms of questions. Maybe it's just to tag it and say, what is level 2 and 3? In terms of resilience program, you got to do that. I think the program is different for each organization. I hope that in the slides today, I've given you maybe an outline for what's in that program. We have a lot of the elements and support for it, but I think you've to develop the program. Patricia, relating to about higher incidents in March, is that a trend in March? Okay, just Patricia, just on my graphic on the incidents, that was purely out of my head, and I wanted to show that an increase or a decrease isn't necessarily, followed by increase in downtime. I want to show there's a difference between that the downtime looked a bit different to the number of incidents. So don't read too much into the actual months. Sarah, but DORA, the CBI operational resilience guidelines tried to cover in advance the requirements that DORA would be in. Would you think that is the case? Yeah, good question, Sarah. I would. I think the CBI's guidelines are aligned with DORA. But as I said, I think it's the foundational stuff, and it's enough to be getting on with. So yes, there is good alignment between the central bank's resilience guidelines and DORA. I would agree. Yeah. Okay. Okay, if that's it. Another good questions. Just from our own point of view, and maybe on that last question, what's in the system? We had planned to, I suppose, create a report to show you where you are on that maturity model and what have you done at the foundation level. Where we currently are is we've put all the Central Bank of Ireland's resilience requirements, we've put them in as that foundation level. We plan to work with a few customers to get agreement, because we don't want to be the sole voice on what we would consider the building requirements. What are the next step? What are the good practices? We want to put stuff in there. We could put stuff in there today and there'll be purely recommendations, but we'd like to link them to either to DORA or to version 2 from the central bank. The Financial Stability Board of the UK did issue documents that just covered cybersecurity, and they had the concept of 3 levels of good, better, and best, but that was only for the cybersecurity. So not all of the wisdom and knowledge is available yet to be able to say what's in level 2. But I think, as I said, I think a lot of people have a lot to be getting on with just getting the foundation right. There's another couple. Sandy, regarding scenario testing, is there a good source of guidance on how to develop different scenario testing plans? I realize that they need to be company specific, but for the non-technical people, it would help to have a starting point as to what kind of things should be considered included in the tests. Oh, yeah. Sandy, I've developed, I suppose, my own approach over the years. What we might do in the new year is we might do a webinar on scenario planning. My own approach would be, there's a few things you have to do in advance. A business impact analysis. If an organization hasn't done that, then any scenario test will probably find some big holes in it. So there's a few precursors to that. I think I did, believe it or not, I did a pandemic scenario test in January 2020 in Boston, the day after the first infection with COVID in America. It was serendipitous, but it was 3 months of research on my part, not continuous, but it was maybe 7 or 8 days and getting information and assembling it and showing it to build a credible scenario. But look, Sandy, I'll take that as a suggestion, maybe for a webinar to building a scenario test, because the regulator does want to see you doing some scenario testing, because it is in that scenario testing that you identify, things you could improve, gaps in the plan. And certainly that American company, one of the things they did in February is to send everybody home to see, so they do everything they do at work at home, and found a lot of gaps. They bought laptops, they bought monitors, and when the lockdown came in March, everybody went home, worked from home, no issue. And it was great. They were very well prepared. It was just serendipitous, as I said. Darren, what are calQrisk in your resiliency? Where are calQrisk in your resiliency journey, and where do you currently sit on the maturity model? I would say we're not scoring the 5 in all areas. I think some areas we do better than others. I'd like to think some areas we have, if I take from a customer point of view, we've probably put most of the effort in to making sure customers, if there's an interruption, that we can recover quickly. So we do things like all of the data that's in the system, we encrypt and push offsite out of Amazon every night. so that if Amazon got hit with the missile, we still have data somewhere else at night time. We could, if we had to, have the software up in another data center with all the current data in less than a day. I'd like to think maybe 4 hours. So those sort of things we do. Our penetration testing we do every year, and we do it. You know, we do a fairly extensive penetration test to try and break it. So a lot of things we do well. A lot of our own stuff we probably cope with longer outages because we would see we're not critical. So yeah, it's a good question. I would say I give ourselves a 4, and we're not quite 5. Although in some areas we do have the right attitude of continuously trying to improve. But no, we're not there yet. It's not a destination really. By the way, it's when you get to where you think you've done everything, have the attitude, and we do better, you know. And as long as you have that attitude that you're continuously looking to do better, you will stay at that high level. Now, when we got over the 45, I can see people beginning to drop off. So thank you. I think we got all the questions. Thank you for your engagement. Again, thank you for your engagement throughout the year. It's been fun doing them. Our next webinar, I think, is January the 11th, and it's a lunch and learn, a 15-minute one next time at 12:30 on meetings. Meetings is governance, I think. But watch out on the website, keep an eye, and we'll keep you informed. Thank you for your attendance. Bye-bye.